proximity, school districts, voting districts, retail store locations, bank locations. When you change the way we do the transportation and our movement, we change the underpinnings of how we actually manage ourselves. And that's just from this one project. Right? I have a 4-year-old son. He will never get a driver's license. In fact, teenagers in big cities aren't bothering to get driver's licenses because they use Uber to get around. Right? Now, when we were 16, the first thing we did was go to the DMV, get a driver's license so we could get away from our parents. Right? What will they do? How will they get away? Right? So here's the latest news from this self-driving phenomena. We now have a self-driving truck operating and licensed in the state of Nevada. Right? A race car driver was recently beaten by an autonomous car on a track. So now a race car driver is now less good than the autonomous car. Baidu wants to have autonomous cars by the end of this year, and Singapore has said that they want to have, within 6 months, a pilot of driverless taxis operating across 1/3 of the city. Okay? And so that's within 6 months. So this will move much faster than we think. Just the cost of accidents in the US is about 9% of GDP. It's an unbelievable expense. We kill 1 million people a year with car accidents worldwide. And so when we can relieve that, it'll be a huge benefit to society. In the US, 50% of all the court cases, all of the legal cases, 50% are car-related. Okay? Now, it's the US, they'll sue anybody for anything, but still. Right? All right, let me touch on one more technology to give you a sense of it, which is biotech. 50 years ago, we discovered the human genome, and we found that life is actually information-based. And when you learn a new language, you learn how to read, then we do comprehension, then we learn how to write. This is the cost of reading DNA, which roughly followed Moore's law until about 13, 14 years ago, and then it literally fell off a cliff. This is moving at 5 times the pace of Moore's law, maybe the fastest moving technology we have ever seen. It's doubling every 3 to 4 months in its price performance. Okay? It cost $2.7 billion to sequence the human genome in 2001. Okay? $2.7 billion to sequence the first full human genome. The second one cost about $400 million. Third one was about $50 million. Fourth one was about $14 million. Does anybody know what it is today? Okay? It's $1,000. We've gone from almost $3 billion 13 years ago down to $1,000 today. By next year, it'll be $100. By 2020, by the end of the decade, it'll cost about a penny. By 2020, it will be cheaper to sequence your genome than it will be to flush your toilet. Right? And when you flush your toilet, we'll probably sequence everything that goes through there. It'll be interesting to see what bacteria, viruses, et cetera, you have inside you. And now we're starting to learn how to write. When you start writing DNA, really interesting things happen because now you're manipulating life. And this is a team where college students are getting together to hack DNA in interesting ways. This team took the DNA of a jellyfish that glows in the dark, crossed it with the DNA of a cat, and you can buy this pet that glows in the dark. Okay? The cat is not very happy. It cannot hide anymore. And this gets very bizarre. And the technologies are now so simple, you can do this in your bedroom. Okay? Don't tell your teenagers they can do this quite yet. Very surreal. Here's one of our companies trying to take advantage of this. They can grow a hamburger or a steak in a petri dish as opposed to hacking it out of a cow. Right? They taste terrible today. We've tasted the meat. Our joke is the taste is doubling every year, so we'll see how that actually works out. Today, they can grow perfect leather that doesn't have blemishes. So they're talking to car companies and fashion houses about this. And the cow is much happier when you can do this. Okay? This is a company that just got approval for this apple. When you bite into an apple, it oxidizes and turns brown. Right? They found the gene that governs that and turned it off. So you can bite into this apple, leave it on the table for 4 days, does not turn brown. Very surreal. Maybe one of the most fascinating things is this, the rise of the microbiome. It turns out that you have 10 trillion cells in the human body, but you have 100 trillion bacteria inside your stomach in about a kilo. It weighs about 1 kilo. And we're finding now more and more medical conditions are related to just the sequence and ratio and the different populations of bacteria inside your stomach. Depression, anxiety, insomnia, etc. A year ago, somebody hypothesized that maybe you could use the gut bacteria to solve diabetes. Okay? That was a hypothesis 1 year ago. And literally 2 months ago, they found that just by changing the bacteria, you can cure type 2 diabetes. Quite profound. Okay? And so if you want to try this, you can take probiotics, which is a crude way of changing the bacteria. A more advanced technique is called fecal transplants, and I'm just going to move right along because that's just a little bit too strange after lunch. But maybe this is the most dramatic thing that we've seen. This is a technology called CRISPR. This is only 3 to 4 years old. We can now edit the human genome as easily as you can edit a Word document. I'm going to repeat that. We can now edit the human genome as easily as you can edit a Microsoft Word document. This now changes everything. The Chinese just announced that they are editing embryos in the womb, and now we open up Pandora's box completely. All the bioethics folks around the world are freaking out about this, but huge implications and very promising from medical techniques, right? So I don't have time to go through all of these, but I just wanted to show a couple of examples of how this explosion is taking place. Let me lift up a couple of levels and give you 2 examples of how industries are being affected. How many of you are familiar with the Tricorder X Prize? Can I just see your show of hands? A couple of you. Peter has a $10 million prize for a handheld wireless device, which is literally the Star Trek tricorder. Somebody will win $10 million when their handheld device can beat 10 doctors in doing a diagnosis. Right? So when your device can beat 10 doctors in doing a diagnosis, you win $10 million. 300 teams have been competing for this. We are down to the final 7. The winner will be announced in about 4 months. In a few months, we will have a handheld device that will beat most doctors at doing a diagnosis. Will completely transform healthcare, right? Especially in developing countries where you have a doctor per million citizens, totally transformative. And nobody in the healthcare world knows this is happening. Nobody. Right? Quite profound. By the way, if you're a hypochondriac, you will love this device, right? In fact, you'll buy 2 of them because one of them must be wrong, et cetera, et cetera. It'll be quite fascinating to see how this happens. This is the leading contender for this. This is called Scanadu. That's a whole doctor's examination room literally in that little box. And they're going through final FDA trials. But maybe the most dramatic thing we're seeing today is the fact that solar energy is riding one of these doubling patterns. The price performance of solar cells is doubling every 22 to 24 months today, and has been for a few decades. Okay? At this pace, we will hit 100% of world energy supply deliverable by solar in 23 years. This will have a massive impact on geopolitics. The Middle East will essentially collapse. The US will have to find other reasons to go to war. Russia, the only asset that Russia has is its oil and gas. Saudi Arabia is now selling off its oil as fast as it can because they do not want to be left with oil in the ground. And you are quite an oil-dependent country. And so you have to shift the economy away from oil because oil in the next 10 years will go to 0. I'm going to repeat this. And really importantly, because it's on a doubling pattern, if we hit 100% in 23 years, in 25 years we hit 200%. In 27 years we hit 400%. 29 years, we hit 800%, and that just keeps going. And if you're worried about headroom, it turns out that if you add up all of the fossil fuel reserves we have in the world, all the oil, all the coal, all the natural gas globally, that adds up to 5 days of sunlight hitting the world. That's how much sunlight we have. So you shift the problem from a scarcity problem to a conversion problem, right? And the conversion is doubling. Here's the relative cost of solar to other fuels. You can see the extraordinary multiplier. Next year, solar becomes cheaper than the energy coming off the US grid. And then we're going to see a huge investment shift into solar. Here's just the last 5 years, and you can see the way the cost has dropped with new materials and techniques. Now it's equivalent to the equivalent of oil and gas and coal. Very profound implications there. Now, we have the technologies. They're all very sexy, and I could go on for a long time about the technologies. But we have a huge social problem. And the social issue is that we cannot absorb this pace of change. Right? Our societies are not set up for this. In fact, all of the structures that we use to run the world, our civics, our politics, our legal systems, healthcare, education, intellectual property, you name it, all designed for a world a few hundred years ago, not for today. We need to actually re-architect the very foundations of how we run society. And we are not good at this. And what we're seeing today is people are freaking out because of these technologies. How many of you are feeling a little freaked out by the technology, right? And the rest of you too freaked out to raise your hand. Here's why. We all have at the back of our brains a little old organ called the amygdala, which is constantly scanning for bad news, right? This is an evolutionary mechanism. It evolved on the plains of Africa thousands of years ago. When we were evolving in Africa, if you heard a noise in the bushes, your amygdala freaked out. It flashed, danger, danger, and you ran, right? Because bad news could kill you. Good news does not kill you, so we are actually 10 times more likely to listen to bad news than to listen to good news. And when we see something new, we automatically think of the danger aspects of it, not the positive aspects of it. And this is why what we see in the news is only bad news, because you'll pay attention. Right? If you watch Fox News in the US, you're pretty much going to die this week, right? And if you're really lucky, you'll last till next week, but then you'll die next week. Right? And you can see them constantly ticking your amygdala. And we need to figure out how to program ourselves away from this, because actually the world is in a better place than we have ever had it. We have less deaths by war. Extreme poverty has dropped 80% globally. Maternal mortality, infant mortality down 99%. Let me show you what it's like to actually get freaked out by your amygdala. I'm going to play, can I get a bit of volume for this in the video? So this is what it's like to ride in the Google car, right? I showed you the polite version. This is what it's like to ride in the Google car.
Oh my goodness. Go is the right word. Holy shit.
There's a little swearing.
Holy shit. There's no fucking hands on that wheel. Oh my god.
Sorry.
What?
It's driving itself.
All right, I'm sorry, you get the general idea. That scream, right? That is the primal scream of humanity meeting advanced technology. Because when you first get into that car and it takes off at high speed, and it's driving the obstacle course faster than you could drive it yourself, and there's nobody in the driver's seat, your amygdala goes nuts. Right? And what we're seeing around the world today is the world is freaking out because of this information age. The Arab Spring is the younger generation using information in a way that the older generation can't conceive of, and that's causing a lot of stress. This is the Prime Minister of Turkey from last year. This is his amygdala freaking out. A smart, thoughtful, intelligent guy, totally ridiculous comment about technology. This is the US amygdala freaking out, right? Trying to use old structures to address new problems. And we have a very fundamental issue. It's one thing to adapt at an individual level. How do we adapt our social structures? And that's the big difficulty. Now, from an economic perspective, there's two things going on as a result of all of these technologies becoming information-enabled. The first is, it used to take about 20 years to create a billion-dollar product or marketplace. And now we're seeing that happen in months. The volatility and the metabolism is accelerating. The second thing that's happening is if you're in a fully information-based industry, you tend to see this huge deflationary cliff take place. So the newspaper industry trundle along, and then all of a sudden a 6x drop in revenues as eBay, Craigslist, and so on hit. This is the music business, same thing. Big cliff hitting right there. That cliff is hitting the TV business right now in the US. Media buying is catching up to the reality that nobody is watching ads. And the fundamental problem that we have as human beings is we are not good at spotting this exponential curve. All of our education, training, intuition about the world teaches us how to think linearly. We take our past performance and we extrapolate linearly to get our 5-year plans, right? And yet the world driven by information is riding this green exponential curve, and we do not spot it. Quick example, how many of you how many of you had heard of 3D printing 5 years ago? Can I just see a show of hands? Okay, a bunch of you. 10 years ago? Okay, 15 years ago? 3D printing is actually 32 years old. It is not a new technology. But back when it was starting back here, its price performance was terrible. You could print out 0.001 widgets an hour. 2 years later, it doubled to 0.002 widgets an hour. 2 years later, it was 0.004. And 2 years later, 0.008. And it all looks like 0. So we ignore it. Then it gets to 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, goes crazy, and then we call it a black swan. Right? So if you don't spot these doubling patterns early, it will disrupt you very badly. If you can spot these doubling patterns early, it's the biggest advantage you could possibly have, because most other people won't spot them. And so and let me show you how badly we get it wrong. In the year 2000, we had 100 million mobile phones in the world. Vinod Khosla, it doubled every 2 years to now several billion mobile phones. Vinod Khosla did an analysis, and he asked the question, how well did the mobile industry expert analysts predict that pace of change? So in 2002, he looked at Gartner, Forrester, Jupiter, McKinsey's, and found they predicted 16% growth. 2 years later, it had gone up 100%, so they were off by quite a bit. But their next prediction was 14%. Right? Doubled again, went up another 100%. Their next prediction was 12%. And you can see what's happening here. When you have this doubling pattern, the experts in that field will all project linearly, because all of their models are based on old patterns. In fact, in 2008, unable to spot 3 doubling patterns in a row of 100% growth, they predicted 10%. Then it doubled again. Now, how much more wrong can you be from 10% to 100%? You're 10 times off. This is not a math error, it's a cognitive error. Right? And this is the difficulty we have. Let me give you one more example. The Google car, when it first came out 5, 6 years ago, the cost of the LiDAR, radar, GPS sensors in the car cost about $300,000 per car. And all the car companies looked at it and said, cute research project, but you'll never commercialize that. 2 years later, it was $75,000 a car. So they said, okay, it's a little bit better, but still too expensive for consumers. And today it's down to $1,000 a car. So we've gone from $300,000 to $75,000 to $1,000 a car. Now everybody's freaking out. Now it's too late. Right? One more example. I showed you this curve of solar energy and the price of solar, the way it's dropped. This is the leading expert in solar in 2003 saying, look, if you add up the cost of the components, the wires, the glass, etc., you will never drop below $1 a watt. Okay? The price continued to drop. In 2014, we were down here. About a month ago, it dropped to 18 cents a watt. And his last prediction, his last commentary was, yes, this has getting below $1 has exceeded my expectations. And we're fond of saying an expert in a field will tell you how something cannot be done, right? Rather than saying, because again, they're all operating off old models. And now we're information enabling everything. Airbnb is taking your extra bedroom and using reputation systems, payment systems, social networks, messaging, location, can information enable your extra bedroom. Peter Thiel invested in Airbnb 3 years ago at a valuation of 40% of Hyatt hotels worldwide. And everybody said, you're crazy. That's a crazy valuation to give a startup. He spotted the exponential growth in their room nights. Right? Here's how their room nights have continued. They recently had 500,000 rooms occupied in one night around the world. At this pace, Airbnb will be the biggest hotel chain in the world by January. In 3 months, Airbnb is the biggest hotel chain in the world. And they don't own any hotels. This is a great business to be in. You're the market leader, you have none of the legacy costs, right? Now, anywhere where we have episodic use of an asset, we're going to turn it from a product to a service. Right? There's about 24 startups in every one of these categories changing everything. Anything that we own is going to turn into a service as we go forward. Okay? And the real driver behind this, the reason that this is all moving so fast, is the fact that all of these technologies are democratized. The cost of access is almost zero. And the standard pattern we see is this. A domain becomes digital, the costs go to zero, open source communities form, and you get new products and services disrupting the status quo. We've seen this in photography. There's only a few factories in the world that could have the expertise to make a film camera. But once you have software and I have access to the digital camera, 10 million developers can go after it. In drones and 3D printing and Bitcoin, in all of these domains are becoming open source. And now, today we have entrepreneurs that can enter a new industry, an old industry, with a beginner's mind, leveraging accelerating technologies and completely disrupt the status quo. Elon Musk may be the best example of this. No experience in the car sector, energy sector, space sector, and he's created market leaders in all of them, right? Just coming in with a new perspective, critical thinking. This is one of our alumni. His name is Emiliano Cargiman. He is Argentinian. He's been voted by our faculty the most likely to actually impact 1 billion people. And what Emiliano is doing is launching nanosatellites. They're about the size of a shoebox. Once he has a mesh cluster of them up in space, he's going to be able to do real-time video anywhere in the world to a 1-meter resolution. Okay, quite incredible. His first 3 satellites have already launched. And before this, typically he had no experience in the space sector, none at all. And so quite fascinating. How many of you are familiar with the Hyperloop? Right, so Elon Musk got so angry that it still takes 5 hours to go from San Francisco to LA, whether you're in a plane or whether you're in a car. So he got together with engineers and designed this. You repurpose an oil pipeline and you shoot people in pods down that pipeline with an air cushion between them, the way we used to shoot messages in companies. And you can go 6,000 kilometers an hour. The idea is you can get from LA to San Francisco in about 20 minutes. I was chatting with him about this, and I said, Elon, I have a degree in theoretical physics. If you try and accelerate somebody from 0 to 6,000 kilometers an hour and then decelerate them, you're probably going to kill them, right? And his answer was, yeah, it's an issue, right? And this is the mind of this new entrepreneurs, right? For me, it's an impossible problem, and for him, it's an issue. And they've solved that issue, it turns out. If you widen the channel using fluid dynamics, you slow the person down adequately. I was half correct. You can't go at 4,000 miles an hour. You have to go at about 2,000 kilometers an hour. But there you go. Okay, one more example. Today you can get $100 headsets from neuroscience headsets that give you quite a good readout as to what brainwave frequencies are going on in your brain. This is one of our alumni. His name is Will Henschel. He was a guitarist for the Eurythmics, the band from the 1980s. And what Will is doing, he's composing music that when you play the music, it puts your brain in the zone. Okay? So if you need to write software or study or work on PowerPoint or work on a spreadsheet, you literally plug into this service, a Pandora type service. This is my brain. This is me on the left and the readout from my brain. This is me before and after he plays the music. You can see my brain is flooded with alpha waves, which indicate that I'm in a focused space. Okay? Now, he's doing this with a Mac and a $100 headset. Now, if you're the CEO of Red Bull, you need to be seriously worried about this, right? Because you think your competition is coming from 5-Hour Energy or Coca-Cola or something. It's not. It's coming from things like this. We actually had the CEO of Illy Coffee, the Italian coffee company. When he saw this, he started swearing in Italian from the back of the room. We said, are you okay? And he said, look, if people start using this, they'll drink less coffee. Right? So as a coffee-producing nation, you need to be looking at this carefully because people might start drinking less coffee if that's the case. By the way, they found as a side effect, this is better for all of the children, all of the kids with ADD and ADHD than any of the drugs they're giving them. That's the side effect. So fascinating implication of this. Maybe the most dramatic thing we're seeing today from a democratization perspective is Bitcoin. The currency is quite fascinating. We recently had $300 million moved around the world in one day for a cost of $6. Right? So Bitcoin is taking out the cost of money transmission. It's got a very rich ecosystem, has many of the characteristics we would look for in a currency, but the real value in Bitcoin is microtransactions. Today, it is not worth doing a transaction for less than about 70 cents. The transaction costs are too high. But with this, I could say, I'm going to borrow your internet on your phone for 3 minutes and pay you 0.06 cents. And so we enable a whole new level of business models at a very granular level. But the most dramatic thing we're seeing is actually the blockchain. How many of you are familiar with the blockchain? This is maybe the most disruptive technology I have ever seen in my life. And the reason the blockchain is dramatic is because it allows for what's called decentralized authentication. We have lots of systems in the world, voting systems, transactional logs, registries that have third-party authentication. A bank is an authenticated ledger. Right? It knows that you deposited $100, it knows we lent it out over there. And we trust our life savings to that authentication. If you can decentralize the authentication, you don't need the bank. Certainly the retail side. So retail banking will disappear in the next 10 years because of this. And let me explain why this is so powerful. The problem that's been solved here is an old computer science problem called the Byzantine generals problem. So it's a story of Constantinople in the 1500s. There were 8 generals circling the city trying to plan attack times. And so they're sending messages around this circle of 8 generals trying to decide when to attack. One of them was a traitor, and he could screw up the messages and send the wrong times, lose the element of surprise. And the generalized computer science version of that problem is, how do you get a secure, trusted message across a network when you don't trust the network? Right? Very difficult problem. For 40 years, computer science PhDs have been trying to solve that problem unsuccessfully until the blockchain. And the blockchain allows you to send a secure, trusted message, and you do not care about the security of the network. And this will completely change the world. It's a huge way of addressing corruption, because you can actually track in a very clear way. This is the CEO of the NASDAQ yesterday saying, we're going to now use the blockchain for all our trade transactions. It used to take 3 days to reconcile. Now we can do it in 10 minutes. That's the CEO of the NASDAQ yesterday. So I think this is going to become very disruptive very soon. Again, I would put Bitcoin kind of about here in its evolution. All the technologies have converged. We're waiting for new products and services. Okay? Let me now touch on what do we do about this. Okay? As we enter this world where so many technologies are moving so fast, you know, in the 1500s, we had the Gutenberg moment, and the printing press changed everything. Today, it's like we're having about 30 Gutenberg moments at the same time. How do we deal with this, right? We're now digitizing every aspect of the business life cycle. Sales and marketing are completely digital. Production, manufacturing rapidly becoming so. And as Henry said, this quote from David Rose really struck me. All of our organizations are built for the 20th century. They're built for efficiency. They're built for predictability. They're built to deliver the same widget in 100 countries with distributed supply chains, ERP systems, predictable backends. But this new world is different. And the definition that I've created for what we call this new breed of company is an exponential organization. We've learned how to scale technology. We can go from 1 user to 10 million users pretty easily today. But building the actual organization is painfully linear and painfully incremental, as many of you know. We're seeing today a new breed of organization that is scaling as fast as technology is scaling. And the minimum benchmark I found is these guys are scaling at a minimum 10 times better than their competitors. So if you're operating at a minimum 10 times better, then you are what I would call an exponential company. So for example, if you're a car company, it costs about $3 billion to design a new car model from scratch. Okay? Local Motors does that, designs an entirely new car model from scratch for $3 million. That's 1,000 times better than the status quo. We've now found about 100 companies operating this way. And what I've done is looked at what are the characteristics that they're using. There's 3 characteristics of 3 components of what goes into these exponential organizations. The first is they all have what I call a massive transformative purpose. Like Google, organize the world's information. Right? Singularity is go impact 1 billion people. X Prize is radical breakthroughs to benefit humanity. TED is ideas worth spreading. It's a tagline that creates a gravity well of interest with a social purpose built in. A community forms, and then you can start to drive the company forward with this new way. The Coca-Cola has just moved to this. Coca-Cola's new mantra is open happiness. Right? Not sell sugar water to highly distributed leveraged chains to add value to our ecosystem of vendors, suppliers, partners, da-da-da. If you have a traditional mission statement in your company, none of your employees knows what it is. But everybody inside Google knows that. Right? And so it provides a very important. I was talking to the global CEO of Unilever yesterday, and he's challenged all of their brands to move to creating an MTP. Every brand in Unilever now has a social purpose going forward. The second is 5 externalities that these companies are using. Our old way of building a business was to get an asset or a workforce, put a legal boundary around it, and sell access to scarcity. Right? Selling scarcity has been essentially the heart of business building from the beginning of time. What these new businesses are doing is they're tapping into abundance. Airbnb is tapping into the fact that if you own a car, it sits empty 96% of the time. Sorry, Uber. Airbnb is tapping into your extra bedroom. Right? Waze, which seems to be mandatory in all Latin American cities, is using the GPS on your phone, and there's an abundant number of those. So you keep a very small footprint, and you use these externalities to scale outside yourself. And it allows you to be very agile. Note that for a company like Uber, The mission-critical function in Uber, which is to match driver and passenger, does not happen inside the organization. It happens out in the wild. And by enabling that by technology, you can do extraordinary things. So Uber uses staff on demand, TED uses community, Google uses algorithms, Airbnb uses leveraged assets, and so on. Then there's 5 internal mechanisms to kind of navigate and control the internal framework of the company. Dashboards, experiments,